Welcome to the Goods Movement meeting. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our meetings can take place in diverse locations around the state so the commissioners and staff can hear directly from our stakeholders around California. We now offer hybrid and fully virtual meetings to allow our stakeholders to participate more fully no matter where you are. The meeting agenda is located on our website at www.catc.ca.gov. Closed captioning is available on this Zoom meeting. Please select the Show Captions tab at the bottom of your screen. There are a number of language options available there to choose from. Any document the CTC creates can be translated into any language you need. Simply email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov, and we will have them returned to you as quickly as possible. For all of our meetings, we encourage interaction with our stakeholders. There will be opportunity for questions and comments throughout this meeting. For those attending via Zoom, you should see the webinar control panel likely located on the bottom of your screen. There you'll find the raise hand and Q&A tabs. We encourage you to use the hand raise feature as soon as we reach the item to give the system time to acknowledge you. Commission staff will let you know when it is your turn to make your comment. Alternatively, you can use the Q&A tab to submit your comment or question. Commission staff will read that on your behalf. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link or number to access the webinar. These should not be shared with other participants as this can create confusion for staff when making comments. Please do your best to be concise. Please make sure that your comments add new information. If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Justin, and welcome back again. I'm Leanne Eager, and I'm chair of the California Transportation Commission. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Just to set the stage a little bit, obviously we have been hearing from all of you across the state about goods movement and goods movement issues, certainly for the last few years since COVID, and some of those issues have been coming to us over and over again. So we thought it would be appropriate to have this webinar and for different places around the state to talk to us about some things that are going on, some things that we can do better. As you know, the commission oversees the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program and Senate Bill 671 Clean Freight Corridor Efficiency Assessment efforts. And so this is near and dear to our hearts, looking at what is it that we can all do together. So the discussion today is for information purposes only. This is not a formal commission meeting, but we do have commissioners joining us today. So we want to welcome all of those. And we know what the issues are. You know, California being the 5th largest economy in the world, some people say 4th. I know we're almost there. Germany's trying to hang on, but we'll get to 4th soon, I know. But we transport our goods up and down the state through our roads and bridges and highways and rails and onto our ports. And so those goods are so important to the economy of the state and really to the world. So with those supply chain issues, we really wanted to talk about what is it that we see in our future and where do we go from here. So today we're going to hear presentations from 3 different regions. Simran Judy from Fresno Council of Governments. Hello, Simran, welcome. Good to see you. And she will present on the Tradeport California and Inland Imports Project, and certainly that's something that's exciting that the governor is supporting here in the state of California, and talking to some of the ports, they're excited about that too. Scott Strzelecki from the Southern California Associations of Governments will discuss freight cycles and the region's approach to goods movements. And Kenneth Cow from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission will talk about their coordination efforts toward a mega regional freight planning network. Understanding that there's a multitude of goods movement topics that could be discussed, and maybe we can do it again at a future date. We hope that this will certainly foster future discussion, future presentations, and then coordination amongst all of our regions and the state of California. So again, you know, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing these wonderful presentations. And with that, I will turn it over to Simran.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Eager and CTC for inviting the Fresno COG to provide an overview of the San Joaquin Valley's endeavor for a system of inland ports. As Chair Eager mentioned, Tradeport California has been noted as a transformative project of regional significance, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to share today. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start by providing some background on the project. It originated from the Port of Los Angeles in 2019, prior to the supply chain crisis, which occurred as a result of the pandemic. So it was something that was already in the pipeline, and the concept for inland ports throughout the San Joaquin Valley was advised. And after the initial study, California Forward, a group, came to Fresno COG and encouraged the public sector leadership. So since 2020, Fresno COG has been serving as a project administrator for the San Joaquin Valley. Next slide, please. Due to the geographic position of the San Joaquin Valley, did I just get muted? Okay, sorry. And so, like as I was saying, for the San Joaquin Valley, this project has a lot of hope, given that the economic contribution of the agricultural products from the San Joaquin Valley. So we need the valley to be included in goods movement. Serving as the primary exporter of agricultural products, it's a $45 billion industry. And in general, there's a balance of trade between the imports and exports within the regions. However, due to the seasonality of agriculture, it does vary over the course of the year. Though the emissions from fossil fuel trucks have led to poor air quality and increased emissions that are trapped with the topography of the valley. So they negatively impact the residents and the health and environment. So this kind of leads to the public objectives and why this project has made it as far as it has. Next slide, please. So this slide here really encompasses all that Tradeport California serves to do. It aims to contribute to a more efficient national supply chain system, reduce GHG and air criteria pollutants in California, increase economic competitiveness, especially in disadvantaged communities, adheres to EJ principles by addressing environmental injustice and health disparities, promote collaboration with the public and private sector, and improve agricultural export efficiency from the San Joaquin Valley. Next slide, please. So the public partnerships have been vast and many. We have the ports, air quality districts, the MPOs of the valley, stakeholders at DOT from both the state and federal government. And I've noted each of the phases of the Tradeport California project that were associated with the specific partners. Currently, we're wrapping up phase 3 and subsequently phase 4. Next slide, please. So the 4 phases of the project are shown here. Phase 1 and 2 have both been completed. Phase 1 focused on the feasibility for a system of inland ports and the preliminary public benefit analysis. Phase 2 progressed work from phase 1 with the addition of stakeholders and the engagement of the Class 1 railroads. And so currently in phase 3, we're focusing on the site suitability analysis or locations for the trade ports and inland ports in the valley, and the financial model for the intermodal hubs. And in phase 4, we'll be covering the legal and regulatory analysis for the entity development and creating a joint powers authority to further establish the trade port entity. Next slide, please. I wanted to include this slide just to highlight this way that goods movement is currently in the country. It runs east to west, but given California's ranking as the 5th largest economy in the world, having a system of inland ports will aid in serving it. The shaded area in blue is the market zone, with the green boxes as a representation of the inland ports, and the red dot there at the bottom is symbolizing the Southern California ports. Next slide, please. So the map on the right shows the market area, which spans from Sacramento to Bakersfield. With the SACOG region, in addition to the San Joaquin Valley region, there's a population of 14 million along the 425-mile corridor. The concept is to have trade port hubs adjacent to the Class 1 rail and State Route 99. And so given that approximately 1.1 million 20-foot equivalent units move through the San Joaquin Valley annually, almost all via truck, by importing goods and exporting agricultural products and moving cargo onto rail, there's an opportunity for efficiency and public benefits, which we discussed earlier. And I wanted to include the last bullet just to show the significance of the Southern California ports. 74% of the containerized cargo moves through the LA ports. Next slide, please. And so this slide here is showing what type of businesses that would be surrounding the intermodal trade port hubs. We would be inviting investment and increasing the economic competitiveness of the San Joaquin Valley by just having businesses locate in California and serve the market that is here. Next slide, please. So this concludes my presentation on Tradeport California. I wanted to provide a, I guess, brief overview of what the project intends to do and what our current, phases of our studies have been undertaking. I have included the website, so you may, visit the website to even gain more insight in understanding the project. And I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. I think I already see a hand up.
Thank you, Samran.
Thank you.
Do we have someone who has a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Eager. We have Carrie Cartwright.
Yeah, hi, Simran, and nice to meet you in person. Again, Carrie Cartwright, Director of Business with the Port of LA, on the CFAC committee as well. Couple of questions specifically for the phases you're in right now. Can you elaborate on the discussions with the railroads, which are probably primarily the BNSF and their rail lines through this area, as well as shippers that are contemplating or perhaps even intending to move boxes? Secondly, most significantly, in the first phase of the analysis that we were involved in, it was a consultant entity that was funded by Blue Ports. In looking at the market segments, it was critical to look at more so how the import cargo and even the export cargo moved to and from the ports. And you cited some data on containerized imports. In fact, a large portion of those containerized imports move via domestic trailers. They're transloaded from marine containers to domestic trailers to deliver throughout that region. The exports is a little more difficult in terms of direct movements to the ports. There's even some handoff of these marine containers once they leave the ports, these imports, to another trucking company that is long haul trucking. So from our data, it's hard to actually pinpoint the direct movements of the marine containers. And same with the exports. A lot of the exports will be handed off to another company to then bring into the ports, kind of like the last mile concept, if you will. And that's partly because of some trucking companies just don't want to do port work, but also the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration rule a few years ago, hours of service, which required electric logging for distances of 100 miles or greater than 100 miles. So that probably played a part in some of these handoffs. The point being is that have you guys done any further research to try and truly identify the total number of direct marine containers from the ports moving to and from this region, which is actually critical for the market segment and ultimately for the business that railroads may want to handle. Also, its pricing is a significant aspect of this, and where are you with pricing and costs for potential mode shift?
Thank you, Carrie. Yes, we've had meetings with both UP and BNSF and identifying what the pricing would be. They're working still quite closely. I mean, I know that it could be a very moonshot idea to work with the railroads, but we've been engaged and have had several meetings with both, and we're still doing the financial feasibility with the railroads and with the private sector, and seeing what their investment would be to make this all possible. Oh, you're muted, Carrie.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How about with agricultural shippers? Have the team engaged them directly?
We've been engaged with most of the ag industry here in the Valley, and they've been heavily supportive in wanting more options to get their products out with a lot of the supply chain issues that we've been facing. So
Yeah, presumably when you're looking at the pricing, the total pricing, there is the Alameda Quarter fee, which you should be familiar with, which is a fee to use 20-mile segment. Even if it's actually dropped off at an off-dock rail yard and trade to the ports, it's still a fee. So hopefully that's kind of floating pricing. Okay.
thank you.
I think we have Ron Brown, but has hand up next.
Ron?
Hi, everybody. And again, not to throw any salt into this. There are more than the ports of LA and Long Beach that are involved in this. And we've seen, and of course, my comments are going to be very biased, and I freely admit that. We've seen other efforts to do inland ports, and there are already some that are being put in place in California. And I'm very familiar with Atwater and Castle Air Force Base and many of the investors that have preceded you to try to do this. And again, not to discourage it, but are you aware that there are other ports in California, being one very close to you being Port of Hueneme, the Port of San Diego? We're all getting funding from the state to expand our ports. This whole concept of supply chain, which is just about everybody in the country now knows the word or the phrase of supply chain, although 5 years ago, they probably would have thought it was something you go to Walmart to buy. There is a lot of variables that are not being considered, Simra, in your calculation. I've been doing this a very long time. I was actually on the Restoration Advisory Board that closed most of the military bases in California and converted them to commercial uses. There are a lot of stakeholders that are impacted, truckers being a big portion of them. The closest proximity to the Central Valley, primarily for the agriculture exporters, in reality are either Oakland or Hueneme. I mean, Hueneme handles a lot of the fruits and vegetables that come up from Central and South America. The other variable that you're going to run into, which I think is your most insurmountable, is that China is making a big effort to move cargo into Central America and then have it transshipped into the US. That is going to be a major, major shift in terms of the actual volume of cargo that goes into all of the West Coast ports, because that's a very, very, very strong initiative that China is making right now. So don't want to be too wordy in this, but there are a lot of variables. Your presentation seems to only include the ports of LA and Long Beach, and I know Gene Soroka very well, and I know the executive director at Port of Long Beach very well. Oakland is the agricultural port for the Western United States. We have built the infrastructure to be able to do that. We are typically a last port of call, which most of the agriculture exporters want. I will actually be in Fresno next week presenting as a part of the Central Valley District Export Council. And I serve on the Agricultural Export Council for the Department of Commerce also. So in reality, and to shorten my comments, you're going to run into a lot of issues. Not that Port of Oakland is going to be resisting it, but you're going to run into a lot of economic issues. It is cheaper for ag exporters to truck the cargo into Oakland than it is to put on rail to go into LA and Long Beach, being that it's going to sit on rail for up to 2 weeks, okay, in a transfer yard before it actually gets into the ports of LA and Long Beach. So there's a lot of variables you need to factor into your consideration. And with that, I'll end my comments.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, I am aware that there are many inland ports and existing ports in California. We've been working with Port of Stockton as well. We have a sort of system of inland ports here in Fresno, Banji Logistics, and there's more than just that, as you've named, just to avoid getting cross-threaded. I think it was my intention by citing Port of Los Angeles is that's where the project initially originated. But we have worked with Port of Oakland. There's been some change of leadership there. And I understand your comments, and you're most likely not the first person to have said that or will say that. So I appreciate your insight. And I don't know if there's any specific question that you would like answered, but thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Simran. I see Carl Davison.
Hi, I'm with KernCog. I don't see Rob on the call, so I wanted to just make sure that I know you guys in Fresno are aware, but I just want to emphasize that we're getting overflow from Southern California here in Kern County in the warehousing, particularly in the inland port at Shafter and at the base of the Grapevine. And you know, there's a lot of trucks full of carrots and tomatoes and everything else that's grown up and down the valley that go over the Grapevine every day in trucks. And I just want to make sure you guys were looking at the distribution centers that are popping up at the southern end of the valley. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. I thought I did see Rob on the call, but Rob and I have worked quite closely in the last year together as well.
I know I see a question in the chat that asks if the phase 1 and phase 2 reports are available.
Yes, they are available. I believe phase 1 and 2 can be found both on the San Joaquin Valley Regional Planning Agency's website, but there's also, I think, the link on the Tradeport website to those documents.
Justin, do we have any other questions?
No, I don't see any other questions or comments at this time.
Okay, and thank you so much, Simran. We appreciate all the information and all the good work that you all are doing. And yes, absolutely. I want to support your view that there's lots of ports in California. A lot of those ports are doing wonderful work. And I know the commission just did a tour of the Port of Oakland and some of the amazing work that they're doing there to upgrade the systems there. And I know we were at Port of Stockton not very long ago, looking at what they're doing. So a lot of exciting things going on as it relates to ports in the state of California. So thank you for all the great information.
Thank you.
So now we'll move to Scott Spilecki from Southern California Association of Governments.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Eager, very much for the opportunity to present on behalf of SCAG today. Could we go to slide 3, please? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so similar to the intro comment, right? California, major economic entity across the United States and globally. You know, when we look at the SCAG region, getting down to the regional level, this region serves as the largest trade gateway in the United States when we look at the overall system. And, you know, this slide, we're really just looking at indicators, right? You know, 600 billion in total international trade, you know, largest seaport complex in the United States, and, you know, supporting rail systems as a part of that. Highway system, extensive highway roadway system to connect, you know, a lot of these first last mile facilities, you know, very robust amount of weekly rail freight trains, you know, coming in and out of the region, air cargo, you know, very large facilities supporting a lot of the shifts based on e-commerce, other things we'll talk about a little later with what's happening in air cargo. And then industrial footprint, I mean, when we're looking at just distribution and warehousing, you know, a little more than 1.5 billion square feet in the region. Next slide, please. So goods movement is essential, you know, just a couple high level bullets here I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Access to the international gateways, as I stated, supports manufacturing, very critical to production side, as well as serving business and residents on the consumption side. And obviously the logistics industry, that's a big part of that. So this graphic, we really want to just kind of give a little bit of perspective, right, graphically, of what that means. So there's multiple supply chain linkages with how goods are distributed, both locally and outside of the region. These linkages connect seaports with local drayage to warehouses and transload facilities, from transload facilities to rail yards and distribution centers, as well as through, direct drayage on dock rail moves that flow to numerous destinations throughout the country. Next slide, please. And as we kind of, think about the local distribution side, complexity just continues to increase, notably from e-commerce, omni-channel, the digital transition that we've all been witnessing. So we just wanted to kind of give a little perspective there. Typical shipment, could be purchased digitally, whatever it is, coming from an import, a seaport relationship, typically gets, moved to a warehouse transload facility that's proximity to the seaport. Then going to a fulfillment or sortation facility further, depending on where the business or resident, closer to where that is, and eventually getting on that route to go to that business or resident. So as I said, consumers able to order these goods digitally, pick them up at the store, or have them delivered from the same retail location they ordered from. This kind of exponentially just starts increasing these touch points. Next slide, please. And then obviously everyone's very familiar with what's been happening, with the pandemic. And as we just kind of think like maybe not 3 years over the last 3 years, maybe over the last 6 years, we extended a little bit, there's just a ton of variables outside of the control of what happens and what impacts goods movement. So, we've got tariff policies that have been going on. We've got the pandemic, we've got war with Russia and Ukraine, we have inflationary pressures, just a lot of things that have disrupted, production to consumption, as well as, just continued geopolitical tensions. So, it's important to note that freight cycles are very cyclical, and they often are more cyclical, more volatile than our, typical overall economic cycles. So we can be doing okay economically from a GDP perspective, and we can be in freight recession, right? Those things can be inverse. Next slide, please. So as part of this, our region here in SCAG, we've really been, we work a lot with regional partners. We work a lot with, state, federal, local communities, the gamut of industry stakeholders, et cetera. So over the past few years, we've been trying to convene, having listening sessions, thinking about what's been happening, and it kind of all culminated into a call for action, where at SCAG Regional Council in March, a goods movement resolution was approved. So real quickly here, there's 5 policies, and they were initially principles that have become policies as part of our long-range plan. There's focusing on, obviously, we're talking about rail in the last slide and these connections of, import, export, that sort of stuff. So basically that's a key focus of, from Southern California's perspective, right? How can we leverage investment opportunities, focusing on that? Obviously, community is a big, important area of what happens involved with, freight impacts, and making sure we're continuing to coordinate work with communities. Zero emission technologies, that's a key priority. That's obviously an area of focus. Next slide, please. As well as this, comprehensive systems approach, trying to recognize operational challenges. Obviously, road rail infrastructure is a big component of, once we get to the surface side, how these goods move. And then lastly, really trying to, ensure that the significant investment in these kind of overall objectives we're looking at is continued across all the different kind of freight modal categories. Next slide, please. Next slide, too. So when it comes to goods movement systems and supply chain, we think it's, critical to focus on consumer activity as a core driver of this. So the next 5 slides, we're just going to try to walk through, some e-commerce trends as well as overall kind of retail food service, what's going on, and some of the impacts, that obviously clearly affect the freight infrastructure and facilities. So as of 2022, U.S. and retail food services reflected about 33% of GDP. It's now over $8 trillion. During the pandemic and at the end of 2020, e-commerce penetration jumped by 40% in that year alone. And since then, it's kind of just marginally increased. So, when we think about what is happening with e-commerce, prior to the pandemic, it's always double-digit growth year over year. That was broken in 2022 for the first time over the last 10 years. It grew less than 10%. However, that year also set a record where e-commerce sales as a nominal amount for the first time eclipsed $1 trillion in the United States. So what does this mean? We expect that e-commerce is going to continue the trend of what we've seen over time, where it's growing at a higher rate than traditional retail. It's going to continue to take market from that. But who knows how the trend's going to, it's at some point, it's going to start going back up a little bit. Next slide, please. So how do we relate this to the region, right? So when we think about what's driving e-commerce, obviously everyone knows Amazon. Aside from Amazon, there's 14 other retailers that make up over 70% of US e-commerce sales, right? So when we think about the region, trip activity, people, how people move and behavior, that sort of thing, what we've done is we're showing a map here on the right side that includes only 5 of these 14 retailers on our map. And basically all these locations all throughout, Southern California essentially start serving as a delivery point, a pickup point, a traditional retail point to the statement I made earlier about this exponential increase in how shipments have to serve these businesses and how deliveries can occur serving consumers. Next slide, please. And then when we look at just, retail food service sales broadly, it's just interesting to note the difference in volatility of what we've gone through when we look at activity. And by activity, we mean we're just kind of pushing pricing, inflation, we're removing that from the overall sales. And we're just, getting a approximated instance of what activity is doing. So the volatility has been extreme. And then, obviously that's the degree, and then the duration, you can go back to the Great Recession and see that duration can have a very big impact. But what we've been dealing with recently is extreme volatility that is very different than what we've seen, at least over the past 20 years or so. Next slide, please. And what we've tried to do from a regional perspective is bring this to our MSA areas. So Los Angeles MSA is Los Angeles, Orange County. The next slide is Riverside MSA, Riverside, San Bernardino County. And we can see very strong correlation, looking at monthly versus, quarterly data, but we see very strong correlation in how these trends are affecting Southern California. Next slide, please. And then when it comes to, the seaports, looking at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, obviously this volatility has transcended, the demands on port infrastructure and facilities and throughput. And, more recently, we are seeing this is a theme that's kind of going to move forward. We are seeing a lot of these different modal gateway areas starting to shift back towards kind of like pre-pandemic trends. Next slide, please. And one thing we think that's, worthy of noting is as you kind of look at trade value. So we're not trying to get directly at activity. So we're looking at trade value here. We can kind of see the proportional performance over time of these ports. And we can see a little bit of, this isn't major, but, a little bit of shifting going on. And then at the same time, we see an interesting note of cross-border activity as a percentage of Southern California trade increasing, right? And, it could be a little concerning, but Asia obviously continuing to be an extremely important part of all global trade, and it probably will continue to do that. But the chart to the right, what we're seeing is a shift in China's trade over the last, since 2018, dropping 10%. And then we're seeing what I've just kind of generally categorized as Asia growth, which includes Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, and Indonesia, increasing by 80% over that same period. So we're seeing a shift in some of these Asian trade partners, and it's substantial, as these Asia growth companies now reflect 75% of China, whereas 4 years ago they were below 40%. Next slide, please. So when we look at trucking tonnage, the reason why we kind of look at this is typically it reflects about 70% of kind of US, tonnage by freight mode. Within the SCAG region, this gets closer to 80% if you start looking at just internal freight flows. And the truck tonnage index is telling, as it kind of clearly illustrates the shift in product mix through the pandemic lockdowns, social distancing, behavior, activity, all that sort of stuff, leading to increasing essential items as well as e-commerce activities. And now we see obviously the volumes, it's still kind of getting choppy here or there, but it's, we're kind of back to that level pre-pandemic. So, in our view, this is a key indicator of the importance of the truck mode with respect to the system, and how it's supportive of many interchange aspects of goods movement, from seaports, airports, rail yards, as well as the business to business, business to consumer, first, last mile delivery components. And then on the pricing side, we think it's important to note that volatility has been really extreme, but at the same time, when we look at the index value, it's still a little higher than 2019. However, the degree of volatility has a lot of implications on the pricing side with how companies make revenue, their equipment capacity needs, et cetera. So, we need to kind of recognize that this volatility just continues to put pressure across this, not just the system, infrastructure, facilities, equipment, like all the kind of components that are going on. Next slide, please. And then on the rail side, we don't have, class 1 rail data perfect for our region. I don't know who has access to that type of information, but we do have, BNSF Union Pacific weekly, data for their overall system. We know Southern California is a big component on the intermodal side as a part of that. So, volatility has just been, you go back to 2015 and you just see it's almost like, kind of like up and down, up and down. But we think it's important to really recognize that, the impacts of congestion, bottlenecks, when it hits the supply chain, it's not always equally distributed across all freight modes, same time, all that sort of stuff, across systems. So a lot of what's been affecting the railroads has stemmed from, tariff things that have been going on, before the pandemic, as well as, shifting in tariff policies, even to where we are today. So, intermodal volumes have remained below 2019 levels when you look at the overall system, and, carload traffic has as well. So, the key is, volatility and kind of like comparing like where we are today versus going through the pandemic versus, right before. So we're kind of seeing a lot of these similar trends. Next slide, please. Air cargo, very similar. I'm not going to spend much time on this. Air cargo tonnage, again, getting back to mirroring pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please. And then with respect to industrial facilities in our region, warehouse and distribution facilities only have continued to grow, over the past decade. I think it's about just below 2% annualized rate. And occupancy, has continued to remain, tight based on the pandemic period, as well as hitting, that 1.5% low, which is, a record when we go back over the past 20 years. And again, same theme, kind of getting back to pre-pandemic levels. And then we also wanted to just kind of note that, the makeup of industrial facilities, has trended towards much larger facilities, and being in the Inland Empire further, from the seaports. And again, retail and wholesale continues to be the majority when we look at these facilities, followed by manufacturing and then transportation and warehousing, just kind of getting a little more at the makeup of where we are today. Next slide, please. So, we've kind of gone through all these kind of trends of where things are now, obviously what are challenges. So, when we think of the supply chain, just kind of distinctly, freight cycles is important. So this chart on the right, looking at the Cass freight index, the shipments, the index value versus the change over time. Again, as I mentioned earlier, during this period, we've had two recessions: the Great Recession, the recession during the pandemic. There's been, fairly clearly, 6 freight recessionary cycles in 2019, even in 2019 before the pandemic. So, recognizing how these freight cycles work is important to understand, as we kind of go through our regular economic cycles. And then geopolitics, I've already kind of touched on this, right? I mean, it's a variable outside of the control of any region, and it's something that, like was mentioned earlier, right? I mean, maybe China directly is declining, but maybe there's transshipment relationships that are, connected to how that works. And then resilience is obviously very important to think about with this volatility, right? Resilience means something important. Freight is essential as infrastructure to help when we deal with impacts, to be able to absorb challenges and things that are critical for communities, for all of us, right? In our day-to-day and how we deal with things. Regulatory environment, not, well aware of all the zero emission focus and the rules that have been out both on the rail side and the trucking side. And, our opinion is we think everyone is highly supportive of this. But there have been challenges. We'll talk a little bit more. We are running a last mile freight program, so we are working directly with 26 private companies on this. But anyways, it's just something that is everyone's trying to figure out, how do we do this? And we're trying to push forward on it. But there are challenges when it comes to working across all these different stakeholders and figuring out large companies, mid-sized companies, small companies. How can we, figure out a plan to make this work? And then operationally, I think, everyone here is familiar with a lot of this, the bottlenecks, the congestion, parking issues, the services on different surface transportation modes. Our industrial facilities themselves experience bottlenecks and issues, the cascading effect of, what happened at the seaports and how it transcended the entire goods movement system. And obviously, with local communities, there's a lot of impacts and issues. So, trying to make sure that we work with these communities and we ensure that we're creating transparency and we're understanding where they're coming from. They're understanding how freight works and how it's going to continue to grow and that sort of thing. And safety and security, obviously, very critical as part of the public benefit connections. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I'll try to get through these a little quicker, but basically this is coming back to the policies and trying to give some context of the strategy approach, right? So the first policy is focused on rail investment. We recently completed an integrated passenger and freight rail study. So we're really looking to leverage the work from that as a mechanism to help support the region. It's always extremely challenging. I mean, the first presentation was about these, partnerships, relationships. It's always extremely challenging to kind of bring those together. So as the regional MPO, we're really looking at, leveraging the work in the study that we've done, as well as trying to work with all the partners. That includes, the ports, our county transportation commissions. It includes working with the state, freight railroad, all these different entities. So we're really trying to add what value that we can to really help that process so we can be competitive, right? We want to be competitive for the region. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned just a little while ago on the communities, we recently did a goods movement communities opportunities assessment. Working very directly with local communities throughout Southern California region, involved engagement, looking at issues, priorities, focusing on workforce development as kind of a key topic. So the goal here is really, kind of, recommitment to relationships. Sometimes it's challenging in how you there's a history, that sort of stuff. So we're trying to, really be, like I said, transparent, have trusted perspectives, improve knowledge, kind of build that collective collaboration as best as we can. Next slide, please. And then our last mile freight program, this is a partnership with an agency that is connected with Air Quality Management District. So it's $17 million in award, almost 100 million in projects that are being implemented. Like I said, we've got 26 near zero emission projects, vehicle procurement, infrastructure development, air quality benefits, obviously a goal. And we view, how do you do a public-private partnership? Well, we want to get public benefits. We also want to ensure that industry can scale and they can, their business can continue to succeed in the return on investment type of things that they need as well. Phase 1 is focused on the implementation of commercial deployment. Phase 2 is still in development, and we'll be having more information on that later. Next slide, please. And we just wanted to showcase, there was a ribbon cutting event for the Cisco facility in Riverside. It's their primary facility. Cisco is the largest food service company in the world. And the Riverside facility is a test bed for their initial, I believe, 40 trucks. This is a 100 truck facility, and their charging infrastructure. And I think that the key takeaway here is, this is a big company. They have a lot of capital. They have a lot of ability to do this, but they've spent 5 years developing their planning for it to be completely self-sustaining, backup storage, solar power, all the things. And, when we think about, smaller companies, it's, that's, the roadmap. How do we get there? How do we figure this out? Next slide, please. And that's the perfect segue to our zero emission truck supporting infrastructure study. This is partnered with the California Energy Commission. Obviously, they're doing work across the entire state, obviously connects very well with SB 671, the California Public Utility Commission, Freight Investment Plan, like everything, everyone's like, we need to figure this out, right? So we're helping support the Southern California region. I know SANDAG, San Diego Association of Governments, they also supported San Diego as part of that Southern California region with their study. And really, getting a sense of stakeholder engagement is big for this, right? We have a technical advisory committee of state, local, regional, all industry, public agency, all the players, utilities, right? All the players. And we're really trying to get a robust perspective of, getting information from industry, understanding market demand, dissecting truck markets to get at what are the needs. And end goal is to have an action plan, have some phased development approaches, some guidelines. We're trying to help, right, put these pieces together, and we're working very closely with those state agencies because they're also highly important within this process. And then real quickly, just our comprehensive regional goods movement plan update. We're in our current process for our regional transportation plan. Immediately after, we go into a 3 to 4 year period of updating all of the goods movement system to try to get things, accounted for, maybe get more technical on some of the modeling side of doing truck tours, more activity relationships, deconstructing supply chain across industries, that sort of stuff. Next slide, please. So here, the last policy, we really just, it's focused very strictly on all the different freight modal categories and supporting everything, not what SCAG's doing here. It's a lot more on the local agency, regional partners, what they are accomplishing with all of their projects they're building, everything that they're achieving, all the programs they have, clean air action plan at the ports, all the zero emission, all the great things that, everyone within our region is accomplishing. So we kind of organize it with, we got seaports, you got the rail system, you got interstates and highways, and within interstates and highways, obviously there's border connections, there's zero emission across all these areas, et cetera. And we just want to highlight that SCAG plays a very, hopefully very helpful role in working with our state and federal alignment. We represent the region, we collaborate with all our partners, we work on the California Freight Mobility Plan, Trade Corridor Enhancement Program development, SB 671, NEVI, all these things. We really try to be on the timeline as best as we can with all these different levels of government and represent our region and coordinate with them. It's very challenging trying to go back and forth, but we try to do as good of a job as we can. Next slide, please. And, you know, this is just trying to give a sense of like what we've been accomplishing like recently. And I think there's a lot of accomplishment across the state and with all these federal programs and what we're trying to do in all our respective areas. So ports and rail, just, you know, a lot of, you know, projects recently that have been awarded that we're very excited about, border projects, zero emission projects, as well as, you know, bottleneck relief. I mean, the trucking mode, it's essential for this like first mile, last mile, right? Someone's got to get something to a point to get it to the rail yard or to make all these things happen to support all the goods movement supply chain needs. So, you know, this is just a, you know, high level, doesn't represent everything perfectly, but just a high level kind of review of, you know, things that have been occurring most recently. Next slide, please. So, you know, this is the last slide, path forward. We are finalizing a technical report for our goods movement overall approach, everything kind of high level what's been reviewed here. We are anticipating having some listening sessions in the fall to begin to kick off our comprehensive update. And Kome, our executive director, is going to be very active in participating in those. And then ongoing work, we have the zero emission truck study, our last mile freight program, and like I said, the comprehensive update. That's going to be kind of our primary work moving forward. So thank you. I really appreciate the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. That's a lot of work going on. We appreciate everything that you're doing, and make sure that, you know, when you have those listening sessions and those kinds of things, send that information to the CTC, the staff and commissioners. So if we can join you. Justin, do we have any comments from the folks on the line?
We do have a couple comments. The first from Hannah Walter, who says you're very helpful, Scott, and from Alan Vigil, commented, great presentation. Beyond that, I'm not seeing any questions or comments.
If anyone has a question, comment for Scott, then raise your hand now. Otherwise, we will move on to Kenneth. Thank you, Scott. Great information.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair Eager, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenneth Cow with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Next slide, please. I'm going to be covering kind of the planning framework and kind of how we plan for freight projects here in the Bay Area and beyond. Just as a refresher, you know, the MTC, we represent the Bay Area, the 9 counties of the Bay Area, almost 8 million people, 9 counties, 101 cities and towns, a lot of transit operators and a lot of jobs, which are really great as well. MTC is also, of course, we're the planning agency, but we also handle a lot of the monies and also handle things like the bridges. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of put the planning context a little bit in terms of how, you know, we are looking at goods movement and freight in our region and how we connect with outside of our region and across the state. Certainly, we are a member of the California Freight Advisory Committee that meets generally quarterly. We also meet very regularly with our Caltrans district, District 4, to coordinate a lot of project delivery and planning coordination there between MTC and Caltrans. We also have a number of other roles that we work with the state on, because certainly the state has a very large role in freight and freight planning. Touch on the last two, the California State Rail Plan and the Freight Mobility Plan. I think we just did an update to those, I think this year, so we were definitely involved in that. And those, of course, set the vision for the state kind of planning framework and how they see freight improving and getting through across the state. So we're definitely at the table, and I encourage you, if you don't know about those, to get involved in those as well. Next slide, please. So zooming in a little bit more on the MTC kind of intra-regional side, we have a number of kind of planning documents, which actually probably I'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later, but we have a goods movement executive team, which with a number of executives from across the region, including the Port of Oakland and us and Alameda County Transportation Commission, various other agencies that we meet regularly to discuss these kind of issues, including projects and project delivery. Back in 2016, we completed a goods movement plan, which kind of hopes to prioritize and think through what projects and goals we have over the next few years. And then 2 years later, in 2018, we did a goods movement investment strategy to really marry the money with the projects. And that was done in 2018. So it was after SB1, but not yet before, it hasn't included any of the IIJA or kind of the new stuff since 2018. And then in 2019, 2020, we also did a Northern California mega regional goods movement study that included not only MTC and the Bay Area, but also Sacramento, San Joaquin, and the Monterey Bay area. And that was funded in part by Caltrans. And then finally, kind of one of the focuses of this presentation is talking about the Northern California Mega Region Group. And this is a group that was formed probably about a decade ago to kind of talk about various issues confronting the mega region defined as Sacramento, SACOG, San Joaquin, COG, and the MTC region. And that group meets about quarterly, and we've talked about a number of things, including things like the roadway usage charge, strategies for EV transition, and of course, delivery of goods movement type projects, and what we're calling the mega region dozen, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So that's kind of what we're kind of doing on the regional side. And I did want to also mention the mega region group was also kind of an outgrowth of Proposition 1B back in 2006. And that included a fund source called the Trade Corridor Investment Fund, TCIF. And that was, we had a corridor in TCIF, which was kind of the Northern California mega region, which included our 3 MPOs. And we continue to work on that, and that kind of became kind of the mega region group. So a little bit of a history there, but it certainly all kind of dates back to funding and trade and goods movement and trying to improve, goods movement within our various regions. Next slide, please. So, if you're in the transportation realm, you probably know all about RTPs and SCSs, the Regional Transportation Plan, and the Sustainable Community Strategies. In the Bay Area, ours was called Plan Bay Area 2050, which was adopted in October of 21. And this includes kind of a discussion, our plan includes kind of the priorities that we've discussed in the goods movement plan, and includes over $5 billion in investments from the goods movement plan. So we definitely are including goods movements and thinking through that in our regional planning policies and documents. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly touch on the goods movement investment strategy. This is kind of what I was talking about, marrying the funding sources with the projects and looking really at the 10-year period from 2018 to 2027, and kind of prioritizing which projects we can kind of prioritize for these funds from SB1, Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, as well as some regional sources like Regional Measure 3, which was also approved in 2018, but it was actually on hold because of a court matter, but that was actually resolved this year. So we can start spending that, which is really exciting. And, also looking at potential new funding sources, such as from IIJA, which we couldn't have predicted back in 2018. And one of the things in our investment strategy is really also looking at addressing community impacts and reducing those impacts and environmental concerns from kind of the impacts of freight. So that was a very big part of our investment strategy. Next slide, please. So of that, again, back in 2018, we were forecasting about 3.8 billion over the next 10 years, coming from a variety of sources here, federal, state, regional, local, and some other funding sources, others kind of including things like air districts and things like that, which maybe aren't necessarily transportation, but certainly are impactful for goods movement. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly touch on these. I won't get into these too much, but we had 3 focus areas. The first focus area was on the roadway network. and looking at, a little over half of that, 3.8 billion going towards roadway improvements. So relieving bottlenecks and kind of improving the efficiency and the throughput and the speed of goods movement in the Bay Area going through our area into, points east. And those are some of the corridors that we were looking at. Next slide, please. Second focus area is the rail side, which is about a third of that, 3.8 billion, excuse me, and really looking at kind of the economic competitiveness, reaching the Port of Oakland, and also, trying to see if we can improve, the mode shift from trucking over to the rail side, and also just kind of seeing what trade-offs we have between freight rail and commuter rail, passenger rail there. And I'm happy to say that a number of these projects were actually funded, including parts of the Port of Oakland Go Port project and some other kind of safety improvements and efficiency improvements around the Port of Oakland. Next slide, please. And then finally, but not least, is community protection, community impact reduction, addressing those community and environmental impacts from freight and goods movements. Of course, primarily looking at the impacts to West Oakland and from the Port of Oakland, but also just kind of along the corridors, the rail corridors and the truck corridors emanating out of the bay into our neighboring counties and regions. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier about the Northern California mega region. As a part of our kind of mega region freight study, we did kind of include all of these regions, including the Sacramento region, the San Joaquin, and certain counties to the south of there, as well as the Monterey Bay area region. You can see here, if you look at just kind of mega region, in the US, Northern California would rank about 5th there in terms of population and percentage of GDP, but we do have the highest gross regional product, if you will, per capita. So I mean, that's something kind of cool. But we don't usually think about, the mega region necessarily. We usually think about our county or our MPO. But when we think about freight, we definitely have to think about how it impacts, the rest of our neighboring regions and our neighboring counties, because of course, freight doesn't just stop within our borders and continues on, not even beyond our regions, but beyond our state. So just trying to better coordinate projects and planning with all of our regional partners across our state is pretty important. Next slide, please. So I mentioned briefly earlier about the mega region dozen. This was a set of 12 projects from our 3 NPOs. Again, that's Sacramento, COG, San Joaquin COG, and MTC. And these were kind of a cohesive set of projects to kind of advance our mega regional goals. One of those, of course, is economic vitality. And we're looking at highway, rail, port, and transit projects kind of bounded by like a triangle, if you will, starting at Sacramento down to Stockton and kind of the center of the bay, at 238, 880 interchange. And what we're looking at here were kind of, ways that we can support our projects for future funding opportunities and really message those projects as like, these are a group of projects that all 3 of our regions agree are really important for our communities. And, this is something that we've produced some collateral, some takeaways, some brochures to share when we're visiting up in Sacramento, our legislators up there and our congressional delegations when our elected officials are visiting DC, to really show that, hey, this mega region that represents, over 10, 12 million people have really coordinated and agree on these kind of cohesive set of projects that really deserve some looking at and funding. Next slide, please. So I won't go into necessarily all of these projects. You can take these back and look at them yourself, but these are kind of overall the projects that our regions have selected as kind of important projects. In the Bay Area, we were looking at, some port projects and some highway bottleneck projects, as well as a lot of transit projects. 2 of our 4 projects are transit. In Sacramento and San Joaquin, they were also looking at a lot of kind of rail projects, as well as kind of managed lanes projects as well. So I will touch on two of the projects in kind of our area. So next slide, please. I will actually preface this by saying thank you, CTC. These two projects I'm about to mention were recommended and approved for funding from the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, and that was approved back in June. So these are actually off of our mega region list because now they are funded, and we have the opportunity, MTC, to add in some other projects. So this project is on Interstate 80 in Solano County. It's the westbound truck scales. Right now, the truck scales there were built in the 50s, you know, back when California and indeed trade and the nation were very different. So it was not really meant for, you know, 2023 type of, you know, containerized freight and traffic levels. And this actually creates a bottleneck to the point where Caltrans and CHP actually have to shut down truck scales because it backs up onto the highway. So this project actually did receive some TCEP from the previous cycle, and of course I mentioned this cycle, almost 130 million funded from the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. So we're really excited to get that project started and you know, get both sides of that bottleneck relieved. The eastbound side was actually also funded through trade corridor type funding, as well as from regional measure funds. And that was actually, you know, it's open to traffic now, but that was built back in the mid 2010s. Next slide, please. And the final project I'm going to mention is the Port of Oakland Green Power Microgrid project. So one of the things that we're really interested in, as I mentioned earlier, is trying to reduce the impacts of freight and goods movement to the surrounding communities. And the Port of Oakland has been a great partner with us and the Air District and our regional partners. And this was a project that they had recommended. It was a $60 million overall project to really create a green kind of power microgrid to help you know, support electric vehicles and onshore power, cargo equipment. Port of Oakland was kind of in a bind a few years ago because yes, we all want onshore power, but then we have those public safety shutoffs because of the wildfires. And so they couldn't rely on the grid. They actually had to unplug, and then now our ships and containers couldn't use onshore power. They had to use diesel. So this was a way to help alleviate some of that. Looking ahead, hopefully we won't have many more of those public safety shutoffs, but to really create the infrastructure to support zero emission at the port. It's currently environmental, but they did receive a 42 million, so a little over 70% of the funds they need from TCEP. So we're really excited to be working with the Port of Oakland to transition them to cleaner sources of funding and to really not have them depend on diesel all the time. So with that, you know, next slide, I think is my last slide. Just wanted to thank you all and thank you CTC for putting this on, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kenneth. And yes, going over to the Port of Oakland and looking at all of those wonderful, exciting things that they're doing, we're looking forward to see what's happening with the next step. So thank you for bringing that up. Does anyone have any questions, comments for Kenneth? Okay, I see Commissioner Grisby.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for all the great presentations. My question for you, Kenneth, and thank you for the great presentation once again, is how were those 12 projects chosen for the list, the mega region dozen, and do we know what the economic impact of those projects will be when it comes to how we compete?
Those are great questions. So the projects were recommended by the MPO staff from each of our three agencies. And we were really looking at kind of a number of things. So economic competitiveness is one, and kind of you know, all that driving our economic engine, and also improving connections among our three regions. And I think those were the main kind of things that we were looking at. And then the policy board, which is comprised of a number of elected officials from our three MPOs, kind of said they were the ones that decided, yes, these are the projects that we wanted. The second question about, you know, kind of the performance of that, I think is actually a great question. I don't think we've run those numbers yet. Right now, we've kind of just taken them and they're kind of piecemeal. We're presenting them as like one group of projects on a map, and that we all agree that these are great projects, but I don't think we've actually done the numbers on, if all of these 12 projects were to be done, these are the impacts of that. So I think that's a great kind of a thought. And, the next time we meet with our mega region partners, I think I'll definitely bring that up if that's okay. I'll give you credit, Commissioner Grisby.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Grisby. Do you have anybody else who has a question for Kenneth? Comments?
Chair Eager, I'm not seeing any others at this time.
Thank you, Kenneth. Great information. Appreciate it. Is there anyone that has any general comments or questions for anyone who has given a presentation? Do we have anyone, Justin?
I see that Commissioner Grisby has raised his hand again.
Okay, Commissioner Grisby.
So I'll ask the economic question for the other presenters as well, but frame it more of how our regulations and what we've worked on values that we hold very dear, like equity and climate, how those might be interacting with how we compete, our competitiveness. We'd love to hear how people are dealing with that kind of give and take.
Simran, did you want to respond to that one?
I think given the federal government and California really being in line with one another in policies, I don't think it's too big of a disadvantage. If anything, I think California is at an advantage. And I guess that, I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if it's too big of a concern, given that we're luckily in one of the states that is, in line with the federal government's vision for EJ and equity.
And Commissioner Grisby, was one of your questions on the economics of the projects?
Yeah, but I think she sort of answered the question, which is that I really want to know how the market is responding, the private companies are responding to what we're doing. Are we keeping them in the state? Is there a competition issue? But I think her answer may have answered that question.
Okay, great, thank you. And Scott?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, with the experience of some of the projects we're working on, like I could be I'll try to be as clear as I can. So, we're working with independent owner operators, and they're not converting to zero emission. A lot of the issues is infrastructure, right? As far as how, independent owner operators, they don't domicile at a truck depot. They could be at a resident, they could be at a leasing facility, rental facility, they could be anywhere, right? So we have seen some of them drop out of the program. As some of them have said they're going to another state, some of them have just ceased operation. Some of it's been personal, right? So that's just some clarification on some of the things we've seen. It's obviously very small representation. And in engaging with stakeholders on our zero emission truck study, there's been some challenges with getting surveys or talking with people. There's definitely a little bit of like, I don't think there's concern with what we're trying to accomplish. I would say maybe it's more on just like, can the timing work? Can everything come together, right? Like, what's the impact on large businesses versus small businesses? That's the way I'd couch it. It's not like anyone's saying we just vehemently disagree. It's more like, how am I affected with what I got to do, and how is that going to fit within the timing of what these expectations are? That's kind of how I'd couch it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Does anybody else with any questions?
Chair Eager, not seeing any others at this time.
Okay. Well, I want to say a special thank you to our presenters. You certainly gave this audience a lot to think about and to mull over and to look at what we need to do next. And hopefully this starts a lot of those conversations. We at the commission and Commissioner Grisby and I Thank you, Commissioner Grisby, for joining us today too. This is certainly something that we look at on a regular basis is what is it that we need to do? And we have, Hannah Walter, who's certainly our expert in this, and she's here with us today too. She lives and breathes this information. So if anyone ever has any questions about where we're going or what the studies are looking like, and some of those questions that you might have, you can certainly contact the CTC staff, and the email is right there. Magically, it came up right when I was talking about that. So please send your questions there. I also think I saw prior Commissioner Fran Inman. She joined us also, and I know we have gained a lot of great information from her when she was on the commission, still do now. So thank you, Fran, for joining us also. So with that, I think this part of our presentations are over, but that doesn't mean the discussion is over. We will continue to look at this as we move forward, and we look forward to the next one. So thank you all for joining us.